Well, good morning, good afternoon, and a good evening to our listeners in the various corners of the world. My name is Silva Kachikian, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to the Armenian International Women's Association virtual program, where we bring you issues and subjects that are relevant to the needs of our global network of Armenian women. One such relevant issue is today's topic, presented in collaboration with the YWCA of Glendale and Pasadena cities, and they are both in Southern California. AWA has been at the forefront of boldly addressing the issues of violence against women, and for the past many years has supported the Women's Support Center in Armenia to provide necessary tools, counsel, and shelter for survivors and their families of children. And as we all know, the YWCA Glendale Pasadena works as a home for sheltering survivors of domestic violence, housing girls' empowerment programs, and advancing racial justice. Now, this is the first of a three-part series to discuss violence in our communities and in families, and how we can contribute and create a culture of prevention. Violence has many forms of abuse, including physical, emotional, sexual, reproductive, financial, verbal, and in today's world, even digital. And it occurs worldwide, irrespective of culture, and although the victims can be of any gender, race, age, or sexual orientation, the most frequent are women. Violence in any part of society affects us all, from the scars that are on the next generation to the weakening of our own social fabric. And during COVID, both the United Nations and the European Union confirmed elevated violence against women and girls to a level that gave rise to the term the shadow pandemic. And if the goal of the UN and the European Union is to reduce and eliminate such violence by the year 2030, well, we have a long way to go in a very short time. So on to our program. Judy Norsigian is an author and co-founder of Our Bodies Ourselves and chairs the board of the same organization. She has co-authored 8 or 9 Simon & Schuster editions of the book Our Bodies Ourselves, and she has appeared on hundreds of television and radio programs, including NBC Nightly News, the Al Jazeera, Oprah, Fox News, among others. And she has served on numerous boards of organizations, one of which is the National Women's Health Network. She has received many personal recognitions from academic institutions and holds honorary doctorates from Boston University and Simmons University. Judy is our moderator for today. Now, just a very quick reminder before we go on that this event is being recorded, and you will have the opportunity to ask questions and contribute to the discussion towards the end. You may raise your hand for attention, or if you wish to remain private, please use the chat. And always remember to mute yourselves if and whenever you forget. So Judy, welcome. The screen is yours. Unmute.
Thank you, Silva, and thank you for your many years of devotion to AWA. The Armenian International Women's Association has come a long way, in part because of your many contributions, being in the coordinating committees for some of our international symposia and conferences, and your ongoing work now as president of AWA. So I just want to deeply appreciate that. I also want to reflect upon the fact that this effort amongst Armenian women primarily to raise this larger issue of domestic violence, sexual assault in our communities has been ongoing for many years, as it has been in many cultures and communities across the world. When we first connected with Armenian women who were interested in doing the first edition of Our Bodies Ourselves back in the 1990s, the first book came out. We were very impressed with their interest in all of the topics, including domestic violence. These were very taboo. People weren't allowed to speak about this topic in public settings. We've come a long way since then. I remember at the AWA International Conference in London and then in Paris, some of the women present at the meetings thought that we shouldn't discuss this issue. The common phrase was amote. This is something not to be discussed in public. We have really changed that quite a bit. And in 2013, AWA co-sponsored a special session at the Committee on the Status of Women in New York City. And Craig, our initial speaker today, was a presenter along with other men. And that session, which was focused on how do we engage more men in the very large challenge of preventing violence, particularly sexual assault and domestic violence in our communities. We have to figure out how to do that without making men feel like we're pointing the finger at them, like you're part of the problem. Well, in fact, a lot of the time men are, but they also can be a very important and essential part of the solution as well. So we've been trying over the years to advance this conversation. Just a few years ago at the Watertown Public Library, we had another event that brought in women and men to speak about this very important issue. What we're hoping will come out of today is an interest on the part of those who are present to share the recording with men and women, but especially men they know who might like to get more involved in some sort of project, either locally or maybe more virtual, including a larger community, that would start to think about the concrete ways men can become engaged in preventing violence in the family and in our communities. It is the excitement that I get from some younger men I've spoken with, some individuals in academia who have looked at this particular challenge in other communities, not just Armenian communities, and they're watching more and more young men step up to the plate to become better engaged. So I'm very excited about this. I know it's been taking us a few decades to advance the conversation. It's not easy in any community. There's practically no community in the world where these kinds of problems don't exist. I'm going to move right now to our first speaker, Craig Norberg Baum, who is a longtime educator and activist around these very important issues of how do we engage more men in this work? How do we inspire men to become part of the solution? Craig has a very long bio, and we will make that available online afterwards along with the recording. And he'll say a little bit about his experience in his initial presentation. And after Craig is done, I'll introduce each of our speakers before they speak. And then we're going to open it up for the participants to ask questions, make comments, share your ideas about how we're going to advance our solutions to these problems. So Craig, why don't you begin? And if you want, you can say a few words about our experiences in Armenia, or we can talk about that later. Both of us have made a few presentations, Craig especially at the American University of Armenia on this very topic, and found some of the young men there quite interested as well. Anyway, take it away, Craig.
Sure. Thank you so much, Judy. And thank you, Silva. It's such an honor to be able to present with you all again about this topic. It's a lifelong passion endeavor of mine to share this information, and I'm looking forward to that. Yes, I've enjoyed several travels to Armenia and had enjoyed the time there learning about culture. I'm not Armenian myself, so I've had to learn, and I've learned quite a bit. And so I'm just delighted to be able to share this information today and to be part of this. And AWA is a wonderful beacon of light in carrying on these conversations, so I appreciate that. And I'm honored to be on the panel today with three other gentlemen about these topics and what we might bring to bear as terms of solutions to what we're talking about. I'm going to share my screen and use slides, sort of my style, and let me know if there's any issue with that. You know, it's sometimes these things don't work as well as we hope. But this is the main thesis, is that men are part of the solution. You know, community violence at large is intractable, we know. We know the recent incursions of war and mass murders often engaged by men as exclusively. So for the promotion of healthy masculinity, which is the positive strength-based approach that I want to bring to bear here, what is healthy? What is unhealthy? How do we want to bring up how we want to be so preventing sexual and domestic violence. This is the concept. I'll review a bit about the Men Engaged Alliance, talk about campaigns, talk about just what's happened to date. I mean, 40 years ago, not much. 20 years ago, it's begun. 10 years ago, in earnest. And now there are formal programs that we can draw upon should we like to. And I'll present a few of those in my short remarks this afternoon, evening, and morning. I'm hoping that these slides can be something you can refer back to, because I will move through some of these topics pretty quickly. I'm taking 15 or so minutes only at this point, but there will be a mention of the problem, a mention of what going upstream for solutions might be like, what some program examples could be, and a strong invitation for leadership in this direction. My own history is extensive, 40 plus years. I had a pro-feminist awakening in my life in 1977 at a conference. Conferences make a difference, so that's also worth the project, doing conferences on the subject. I co-founded Raven, Rape and Violence End Now in 1978 in St. Louis, Missouri, USA, on engaging, male perpetrators of sexual and domestic violence. Did that for a number of years. Then I moved on in 2005 to a state coalition against sexual and domestic violence in Massachusetts called Jane Doe Inc. A state coalition, 60 some odd members doing emergency intervention work as the YWCA is doing. Then in 2010 and from till now, I have joined what's called the International Men Engaged Alliance. You can look that up at menengaged.org. There's work all around the world being promoted and supported, which I want you to know about. But before I go deeply into this material, I want to appreciate the women who have led the way, survivors, female and male, who have led the way with their courage to tell their stories, advocates who have done the work on a daily basis, and certainly the men who are here now accepting some responsibility and leadership for the conversation, which is what this really is about. Taking that kind of action and celebration, in a sense, celebration of change. So with that, let me say a few more words about the Men Engaged Alliance, founded in 2004, International Alliance of NGOs at menengaged.org. They are represented around the world. There are 6 regional parts. Here in North America, Canada and USA collaborate as the North American Men Engaged Network. There's a Caribbean network, a Central American network, there's a South American network, there's African, there's European network, and there's some other regional networks, Asia, the Asian network in particular, closer at hand to the Armenian country. Europe and Asia are surround, but there's no specific leadership in that region. There are in Croatia, but not all the way to Armenia as much. So it's something to think about. But there are focuses in leadership all over the world. And just to say what we're talking about here, as UN Women estimates, 35% of women globally have experienced physical and sexual violence in their lives. And here in the US, the Center for Disease Control has a nice, clear study. You can follow this link that really represents that 1 in 2 women and 1 in 4 men in the US have experienced sexual violence during their lifetime of some sort. And the great majority of offenders are male. Not to say there aren't female offenders, there are. Not to say there are male survivors, there certainly are. And there's a terrific organization in the US called 1 in 6 that specifically extends their hand to support male survivors of sexual violence. And most centers that work with domestic violence overall will address male survivors should they knock on their doors. The majority survivor who knocks on a door is a woman with her children. So I wanted to say that this is a super problem around the world, and one that affects all of us in some fashion or another. So even these days, COVID-19 has only exacerbated the circumstances. The situation that's at home for survivors is harder, leaving is harder, getting alternatives is harder, staying safe is just harder. And so I just wanted to mention that circumstances are not better, they're worse. Let's talk briefly about what I mean by moving upstream to solve this problem. This is a river flowing left to right downstream, and we're used to, I think you can see my cursor, I'm not sure, but this is tertiary or intervention, or the emergency work, the ambulance work, the shelter work, the emergency services work, the hospital work. to take care of people. We must do this, and we are doing this. When you move upstream, you find people already in the water, in some sort of trouble or steeped in some sort of cultural messaging that leads to the problem. And we call that secondary prevention, helping folks at risk. Many ways to do this. At school, in communities, in churches, all around. There are ways to do education for people who are in some measure of trouble. We'd also like to think about how to get all the way upstream before the problem starts. How do folks get thrown into this water? It's an important question, one we need to keep to talk about frequently. But that's what I mean by moving upstream, is that there is a place where this problem starts, and we need to think about how to go there for conversations so that 40 years from now, we're talking about something different. You know, next year we'll keep this conversation going, the year after that. 10 years, how's it changed? 10 years further on, how's it changed? For the next generation and the next. This is what we're thinking about as prevention process. So think about this. One organization really can't embrace all of this very easily, can we? It's just too much. But you can focus and move it upstream. And what I'm going to speak about today is the primary prevention practices, secondary and primary, the upstream conversation. I won't be speaking so much about the tertiary or intervention pieces today, though they have merit. How are males involved? We're focusing on cisgendered heterosexual males. That is not so much a gay community or trans community or gender non-binary folks are in this water too. But my work has largely focused on the cisgendered heterosexual male consideration. I want you to know that so that as I speak, you'll recognize that flavor or character in what I'm speaking about. Some offenders are male, many enough, 25 to 33% have some perpetration in their lives. Many are victims, 10 to 20% of the male population, there's some measure of victim. Many, the majority, 50 to 70% of us are bystanders, and bystanders can contribute and help, and we're going to focus there on all of us as active upstander bystanders. So this is the framework. But there is a spectrum of readiness, and readiness is a question I want you to think about for a moment. There are many hostile and opposed individuals. I'm going to think about the males I'm saying, who feel that this is just making sissies out of boys, girls out of men, things that they find this hostile and opposed to the very nature of manhood and manliness, and strength and courage of man, becoming a man, being a man. And so there is an opposition to this work, what I'm saying. There is also a great crowd of us who are not interested and not thinking about it. It's not on my plate. I want to think about this. They're just out there not thinking about it. Then there's a community of willing and ready. I was there once. I'm now an active leader, but there are a strong community of willing and ready males, male-identified folks who want to help with this. They have a reason to want to help with this. They're fathers with children. They're partners. They're brothers of sisters. They're partners. In a way, they want safety in community. They want safety for the children. I feel this way. I want safety for my son. And this is a motivation of mine that often chokes me, that this is what is important. Active leaders certainly exist. And I'm one of them. There's a community of them, more and more and more. The entire Men-Engage Alliance is a support system for active leaders. And thinking about these different communities, I know that my chart here gives them equal weight and equal size, but they're not equal. There are different numbers in each of these regions, but there are different things to do for each of these people. So I want you to think about that. If we choose a project going forward, what's the audience? And this represents, I just say I'm thinking mostly of willing and ready and active leaders in my work. And I'm addressing you all as that. And that we have, what are you needing to move forward? What steps, what support, what acknowledgement, what readiness do you need to help with what you might do? So I want to thank Russ Irvin Funk, who's one of the leaders in our field, who helped frame this structure, which I find very helpful in thinking about strategy. Here's some examples. I'm about half done with my talk. I'll be through soon, but I want to give you some idea of what I'm talking about as examples. One is training in bystander activation. This means see something, say something in the most common frame from public affairs. How do you activate when your neighbor, your family member behaves dangerously? How do you respond? You're a student in a school, in the hallway, you see your friends behaving dangerously. How do you respond? That's called bystander activation. And there's formal training now in this. One strong and well-known model is called Mentors in Violence Prevention, MVP. You can follow this link if you take the slides and learn about it. Another is called Fatherhood Support, supporting men in their nurturing development, their nurturing roles, celebrating men as caregivers. And both these second programs really go in that direction. There's some very strong training for men being dads and nurturing and supporting and celebrating and feeling very proud of nurturing roles and being with children. It's very proactive, very preventative, very activating. A safe world is to have men with children in successful ways. But there's strong formal programs. You can run a Nurturing Fathers program. Finally, the Men Care campaign is in the area of public affairs, of doing campaigns that are posters, messaging, social media of all sorts, providing role models for men at large to say, here are ways to be proud, strong men. This campaign celebrates the nurturing roles men can be in. So let me show you some few pictures. Here's some men and women in the Bystander education program. They're very happy, very sports oriented. A sports-led program is something that the Mentors of Violence Prevention enjoys, using sports as a role modeling framework. Fatherhood training, get dads with kids, having them feel comfortable, excited, competent, and hanging out with kids and raising children, doing the household work. Then the third example is just to celebrate this in public affairs. These are posters in countries and locations where these are local men with local folks, local kids. And the kids responding with celebration and appreciation for their participation. And the Men Care campaign is formal. You can look it up. You can see how to join, how to participate, how to go there. But it's about generating these posters and putting them up and messaging out in the local immediate community. So this is what I mean by examples and things you can do to develop a participation of men. There are great steps that churches and faith-based communities can take. Some simple ones are to do Domestic Violence Awareness Month special services and activities. You can run men's health group conversations about men's health, because this is a men's health question. And you can also teach educationally in the schools that you run with healthy relationships education for parents. Certainly how to raise boys, how to raise healthy boys, developing healthy boys would be a great topic, and something that I know there's formal programs to draw from. So these are the examples that I want to share with you. Now I want to switch and draw to my conclusion some challenges and some strengths. This is a conversation about what we encounter every day, and to inform the kind of definition that we hear talked about as so-called toxic masculinity. This is drawn from the work of offender treatment, intervention with men who batter, men who are violent at in the home. Here are some strong characteristics that promote the violence that needs to be countered and contradicted in the process of treatment. One is primary entitlement. It's my right. This is what I get to do. I'm not angry with you. It's just, this is my position. It's not about losing control. It's about policing my position. Another is fatal peril. I have to stop what you're doing. You're interfering with who I have to be in my position. So I have to hit back. I have to control or police. The sense of being in some deep trouble. Men feel this way. We call it fatal peril. And you can learn to identify that feeling and do something to change your environment at that moment. It's a immediate intervention, crisis intervention tool to understand fatal peril. The other is expectation of service. Just a general thing is that you're there to serve me. I'm not your partner. I'm here, you're here to serve me in my relationship with you. And extend that to any relationship is not very happy. Bring me a beer, is a colloquial term of this. This is the sense that needs to be changed to provide equity, that we do things for one another as opposed to you just do things for me. And to objectify, to thingify in a more colloquial term, you are nothing, you are below me, I can do this to you. In order to meet or hurt you as badly as I can, I need you to be an object. And that's what happens. And all of this has to be transformed to generate safety. So this may inform, in the extreme sense, what all of us experience in little ways, small ways, the small insults, the microaggressions are all kind of tied up with these are the more extreme realities involved. But they are informative to kind of think about, well, if all this is on a spectrum, where am I? Where are you? Where are we? What do we need to talk about? And how am I raising my children along these lines? So that's something in conversation. So let me move over to some strengths. Just say that all children are born loving, caring, and sensitive. And somehow children go from there to something different. So what's that process? Something to understand. Boys are eager in our experience to claim their capacity for caring. Boys like to care. So something happens to that over time. But their strengths, it's a strength they can remember. Overall in community, strength and courage are valued. It's strength to care, it's strength to respond, strength to stand up, strength to courageously speak out and take a stand and speak. So strength is something we value. And that strong man is a big part of our manliness, is being strong. So we can draw from that. Masculinity overall is taught and can be changed. It's more a social practice than it is an innate born identity. So I wanted to say that these are strengths. And I want to say that we have a hope and we have a direction to go. So finally, let me say a few words about culture. Cultural strengths matter. What does Armenian culture bring to this as strengths and challenges? Let me say something that's outside of the Armenian culture, was the Native American culture. Native cultures around the world do bring strengths. This particular one honors quite explicitly Mother Earth and nature. And this is something they can draw upon in helping men. They talk about men returning to base, returning home, returning to original culture as a way to find a way of safety. And they can draw upon a story in the culture that says that and is supported by imagery and art and music. And so we're looking for that kind of supportive messaging. So discussing Armenia in particular. So I'm not going to fill that blank in. I'm hoping the audience fills this blank in. So this is culture matters in all sorts of ways. Finally, I really want to help men take a stand for change, to allow and encourage diversity, to talk about gender roles, become active bystanders, celebrate this change for men. As fathers, as coaches, as friends, as colleagues, as partners, I invite your leadership. So thank you for allowing me to speak. Look forward to visible public action. We welcome many voices, knowing that learning happens through doing, and we need to be proud of the work. So thanks, everyone. I look forward to hearing responses and your thoughts on this matter. So feel free to be in touch. So let me,
well,
thank you, everyone.
Thank you again, Craig. That was a great set of ideas to bounce off of. And we've got two phenomenal respondents right now, coming from somewhat different backgrounds, but all in the legal field, interestingly enough. One a law student and the other an accomplished faculty member and experienced lawyer and scholar. Our first speaker is Arum Gavor. He is the Associate Dean for Academic Affairs at the George Washington University Law School and a nationally recognized scholar in the fields of administrative law, federal courts, and national security law. His work has reached many prominent law journals. He's been cited by the Supreme Court in 2009, and he's received many, many teaching awards and other awards for his amazing accomplishments. He worked in the Civil Division of the U.S. Department of Justice, and his longer bio is available at the AWA website. And I want to say that I believe that one of the strongest motivations for Arum has to be that he's the father of 3 smaller children. And we all care about how our children are raised, how they're socialized, how they learn empathy, how they learn to be better citizens and compassionate individuals. And as a father, I know that Arum cares a lot about this issue, as do many other fathers, and probably has a lot of insights to share about where we can move on this issue within the Armenian community. So Arum, thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you so much for having me and for that very kind introduction. Thanks to AWA for the invitation, Silva, Craig, and Manu as well. Judy's totally correct. I come to you as a father of 3 children, 1 daughter, 2 sons, husband, son, brother, grandson, and as a cousin. And in my background, this particular subject matter is not within my traditional professional wheelhouse. Although what I will try to do in the time that I have to speak is draw from my areas of knowledge to try to add value and contribute to this conversation. From a professional standpoint in the Justice Department, I did spend a good period of time helping to bring war criminals, child sex abusers, traffickers to justice in the context of civil denaturalization for those who attained the franchise of U.S. citizenship and lied about their highly terrible behaviors that of course are the subject of opprobrium in law. But also looking at these broader issues, I very much agree with Craig's premise. It's remarkable the time and effort and the nuance he's able to bring to this. My general thesis is that I do think there is a massive role for men in this. I think it is indispensable. This will not achieve palpable movement without men's direct involvement. I would say predominantly first as the perpetrators of this conduct, but also as facilitators and mentors to try to ease it away. First, I would say the accomplishments. This past 100 years or so is probably the furthest we have seen for the advancement of the diminution of domestic violence, pretty much all of human history, right? Most of what we've really looked at in this past century has done everything from suffrage to having laws in the first place, to serious enforcement, to having organizations. But of course, that means absolutely nothing to the victim right now who is suffering. It's highly individualized. And I can say that as an Armenian, our culture has certain similarities among our different dispersed population centers and backgrounds. And then some of them are very unique and distinct from each other. Certainly, I think we come from a culture that values strength, a culture that values masculinity, sasun tavit, one nation, one struggle, so many different symbols, right? We really vault strong, masculine, usually warlike models into our mythology. And that's, I would say, sort of normal for the South Caucasus and that part of the world. But also, I would say that there are very big differences between, let's say, the Armenian American experience, especially those who've been here for at least a generation, and those who are in Armenia. And now I think is a very important time to have this discourse and conversation, because I think, and from the data, anecdotal and quantitatively significant that I've observed, it's a time of crisis. COVID was not good for gender violence and domestic violence. It was absolutely terrible, and it's still terrible. All of the numbers are pretty much off the charts internationally. That's a very key point with the lockdowns. And then second, war is definitely a significant contributor, I think, to further domestic violence in Armenia, especially those who are war fighters, returning from the front, suffering the scars psychologically that flow from this. So I think it really is an important time for a call to action. And tying that into, besides just an observational piece, I did pour through the US government's, I would say, one of its most predominant sources in terms of human rights and germane to this topic, domestic tranquility and safety, is the country condition report for Armenia. The latest one is the 2020 country condition report that was published on March 30th of 2021. And it reinforces, I think, what we already know, but there's also some promising information in there. And in part, that Nikol Pashinyan, regardless of your viewpoint of him as a premier, has certainly acknowledged and I think drawn into the mainstream conversation, perhaps more than has been in the past, domestic violence issues. And that's, of course, drawn from a very unfortunate predicate where there were some very serious, highly publicized examples of domestic murders, abuse, hospitalizations during COVID that I think compelled his attention in part. But I think we still have to acknowledge the fact that it's being talked about, first of all, is a very good thing, that there are some laws, but there are also proposals for more significant constraints within the law to combat this. But really, I think the rubber meets the road most in an organization such as AWA with regard to on a one-on-one basis and perhaps small group basis, activating and educating and also encouraging men to make better choices. I think part of that flows from a realignment of what masculinity is. Certainly, there's a biological component to it where boys just tend to be 20, 30, 40% more aggressive, in numbers than comparable females. And we reinforce that in society. But having the right values to, I think, contain that and to channel that to more positive ends, supposing the aggression is applied in a more protective instinct as opposed to one where people lack coping skills to respond to the stresses of their lives is important. I also think we can leverage the Armenian Church, or certainly the values espoused by the Armenian Church. People tend to be on the more secular side, because I think Christian values, one of the predominant aspects of our identity, one of the reasons why we survive, besides having a distinct language, an alphabet, and perhaps mountainous terrains, we're just hard to invade, is our religious identity, which is singular in all of Christianity and increasingly, I think, rare in the South Caucasus. I think those are very important structures of our society that we can draw upon. But again, on the most granular level, because it's so easy to wax poetic about these broader concepts, it's a day-to-day thing. For me, and just this is my season of life, and Razmik, I think, is a good co-presenter because he's in a different season than me, is being a father and being a husband and trying to be a caretaker to parents and parents-in-law as it's needed, and to try to raise my kids the right way, and to teach my boys, predominantly my older son, who's 7, my youngest is 2. So my 7-year-old, who I've had the most opportunity to teach, I suppose, my version of intended masculinity, which is one that is more protective and thoughtful and also governed by thought and reason and external values, which I think is a really big factor of this. Having a value-based society, whether it's undergirded with religious orientation or not, is absolutely indispensable to resolving the scourge. So thank you for your opportunity that you're giving to me to provide remarks, and I look forward to contributing.
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much, Arum. That is really inspiring. And as you were talking, it reminded me that we need to put together a good book list, not just because there are fine books for young children that parents can read to them that start to address these issues in an age-specific way, but that I know from the past, from some of our women's health experience, that there are people out there who want to translate some of these books into Armenian, or if there are such books in Armenian, translate them back into English so that we can all share the wisdom that some of these very important books have. And Craig also has got some books on his list that have been used multiple times in some of the trainings with early childhood educators that he has led and worked with. At some point after Razmik speaks, I will share a little bit about Armenia, because we did get a short report from Mara Matosyan, who is the most amazing woman who has been leading the Women's Support Center there for a couple of decades. And we cannot tell if she's present because we still have some names that are missing under among the participants, even though we know they're present. So Razmik, thanks you for joining us. And thanks for Hasmik for finding you out there in Glendale, California. Razmik Sarkisian is a law student at Southwestern Law School and in his third year. He currently serves as the volunteer chair on the board of the Armenian Law Students Association at Southwestern. He is a proud alumnus of the Armenian Youth Federation, AYF, an international youth organization dedicated to the principles of self-determination, economic justice, and social equality. Through the AYF, he learned to work toward the moral, social, and intellectual advancement of Armenian youth, and has worked as director of the Montebello chapter of the AYF Juniors. He worked as an educator at Armenian Mesrobian School, where he taught English, Armenian history, and digital media to high school and middle school. He graduated from UCLA in 2013, studying English, Armenian studies, and digital humanities. Razmik, thank you so much for joining us, and we welcome your wisdom today.
Thank you so much to AWA for having me and for creating this opportunity for such an important topic and discussion. So I'll keep my remarks brief and share one or two anecdotes and contribute more as we go into the discussion. But as mentioned, I've been blessed to work with youth in the Armenian community and broader community for the last 10 years. And I've thought about these issues quite a bit, especially in having discussions with young men and young women about these topics. I think a lot has changed since I was in high school. I graduated in 2009, for example. And I think young people and young men are becoming more receptive to thinking about these issues and knowing that they exist in the first place. And of course, there are still challenges. From my own experience, I've seen that bad behaviors are often taught, if not explicitly by bad role models or older friends who think they mean well, but also implicitly through media and social interactions and representations that we see that we think are reality, except they aren't. I've seen older students who've given bad advice. I've also felt like it's up to us to break these cycles ultimately and become positive influences. I think it really takes a village, and it's not a solution that's going to just come from one place. And a lot of it really hinges on modeling the right behavior to the next generation and less from just lecturing it. Kind of like Craig mentioned, there is a spectrum of readiness here, and I've seen students and young men on all ends of that spectrum. And I think it's a good challenge when you see someone who's hostile or opposed, because it's sometimes a matter of how you approach it. With youth especially, I think they kind of have a knee-jerk reaction sometimes to anything that's presented to them as a dogma or as an authoritative rule. And sometimes it's about reframing the way that they look at it. One thing that I've tried with high schoolers is to show them that perspective, but from the idea that the roles that you're given, these gender roles, the box of what it means to be a man traditionally, is also an authority that's passed down to them that they don't have to follow, that they can break out of those limits. You're not stuck with just being this strong rock that's emotionless and that has to be aggressive or simple things like that. You don't have to follow these rules that you're given. You can cook, you can cry, you can express emotion, you can be vulnerable and still be a strong person. And you don't have to follow those norms. And sometimes when we try to model the positive behavior as you have to act like this and that, is when you sometimes lose them and you get that hostility. I think speaking about challenges, I think sometimes because there's this imperative to not express emotion, and we're all human and we all do have emotion, that you find young men channeling that emotion in improper ways. They don't have the proper outlet, and it sometimes boils over or does not get expressed properly. I know I had one youth at AYF who in our juniors, so under 16 years old. I think he was a 13 or 14-year-old. I would always see outbursts from him and aggression, and I didn't fully understand what was the source of it until I found out that his mother was struggling with cancer. And you see that someone who on the surface could just seem like a bully or someone who's aggressive is actually struggling with so much. And it's like I said about how you approach it and how you find those outlets for them. One of the things that I think really affects young men is a lack of perspective of what women go through. And I think when you give them that perspective, they're able to build empathy and understand it on a deeper human level. With my 11th graders, when I was teaching at Mestrobian, we used to do an activity where we would put up pieces of paper around the wall. It was called the social identity exercise, and we would ask them questions that would lead them to go to different parts of their identity and explain their experiences. And it was during that activity that I saw some beautiful things and reflections from students. In a lot of ways, we have blinders on in our individual lives, and it takes hearing from your peers to realize what's going on in their shoes. A number of young women discussed challenges that they face as young women. Some discussed physical harassment that they had faced. And these are high schoolers saying this, and they've already experienced physical harassment. Some of them talking about from a younger age being harassed and realizing that in society they were being objectified. And I'll never forget the way that these conversations affected some of the young men a part of those discussions. I remember one who originally seemed pretty opposed, not hostile, but opposed to the whole discussion. And as youth often do, they'll sometimes make jokes or act silly during these serious moments because that's just their knee-jerk reaction to it. And early on in the discussion, I felt like he wasn't as invested. He kind of was taking light of it. And after those conversations, towards the end of the day, he actually wanted to speak up. And he said that he was really shocked and couldn't believe what he was hearing from his peers, from people that he considered friends or sisters. And he had never fathomed in his mind that women go through this. And it took hearing from his peers to realize that these are challenges they face. And through one conversation, obviously it's not just a magic bullet solution, but through one conversation, I saw the way that he moved on this spectrum, from seeing this as, oh, this is something we're doing in class, I'm just going to be silly because the teacher wants me to take this seriously, to becoming emotionally invested in it and realizing that he has a responsibility there and that he can affect how people are treated through his actions. So I really do think it takes a village, and it takes all of us from all ages to model that positive behavior to the next generation, and in a lot of ways break these cycles. And having that perspective from people from all walks of life, I think this may be my English major bias, but I do think that by hearing other people's stories, you really are able to develop your own sense of self better. And a last point that I'll make is, in this way, it's why it's so important to actually have young men consuming media created by women, by having more perspectives in media from women. I mean, I remember when I learned about the Bechdel test, you know, this notion that it's rare in a lot of mainstream media to find two women in conversation with one another, not discussing some superficial relationship with a male, and that these media are often created by men with their limited notions of how women interact. And I think reading and consuming media created by multiple different perspectives helps us break from these normative views and gives us a more full understanding of what it is to be a human. So thank you for giving me this opportunity to share, and I look forward to contributing as well. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much, Razmig. And I'm really looking forward to taking our conversation to the next step. I do want to acknowledge that a number of you are in church communities, not just the Armenian church community, but that church community as well, where clergy are trying to address this problem. I remember over 15 years, the late Daja Davidian was a priest in Watertown who knew my father well, and it was very dear to me because our offices for our bodies ourselves were actually housed at the St. James Armenian Church and Cultural Center. He was very actively engaging with younger men in the clergy to get them interested in this issue. And we've seen that we've come maybe not as far as we need to come, but there are members of the clergy who are concerned about this issue, working in this issue. One of our participants just noted that there is a free law clinic in Glendale that is available to help folks who are in distress because of domestic violence. Someone else is just noting in the chat that part of the problem is the attitude of women, sometimes mothers, who carry some of these ideas that boys shouldn't cry, that boys should only behave a certain way. And if you're getting that message from both your father and your mother, it's pretty powerful. So we have to educate all of us, not just the men in our lives, to think differently about what we expect of boys and young men. I'm going to move now to the few comments that I think Manug will make as kind of a wrap up, and then we'll open it up to everyone. I'm sorry we're so late. Manug is a board member of AWA and has been a long time activist and advocate in this field. He is possibly one of the first men, if not certainly the first Armenian man, I think, to get a degree in women's studies back in the 1970s, when many universities didn't even have a women's studies program, and has been long sensitive to these issues. I cannot begin to give you a summary of Manug's resume, because like many of us in our 70s, he's been around for many years and done so many things. But Manug, your thoughts and reflections briefly at this point would be great before we open it up to everyone who's present.
Thank you, and I'm honored to be amongst you, especially with our last two speakers, Judy, and I'm so glad you brought up Reverend Daja Davidian. He was truly an inspiration. And I noticed in the comments that Gardiner mentioned some other clergy. There are those positive clergies. We've got some work to do. But as Arum said, this is something that has been in all of human history. I'm a researcher, I'm more an academic, but if you find out that in 1994, when I got a call from the United Nations, they were looking for a Russian-speaking woman rape therapist. And I said, I will help you find her. And the next thing I know, I'm getting a call from Washington. Sorry about that. And they want my resume. It's the State Department. And I have to, first of all, thank Manya Lefian, who's also worked for the State Department, and she helped to set up the programs that are in Armenia today, and also Kendra Bogosian Marasco. It was said here, and I think Adam mentioned the new studies that came out. And you're right, Judy. I went in there because of Kendra Bogosian Marasco, who teaches about this subject and actively trains police departments and state polices when she's in her 20s. And Manya, she told me that I had an influence on her when she was 17 years old and she was doing a video project. And here's the woman, because this we haven't recognized, the YWCA program in Glendale. This is a woman that was one of the originators of that not only going on to get her law degree, she's also the one that wrote programs, set up the training for everything to do with domestic violence that exists in Armenia. And that was part of her charge. But going back to Adam saying this is from the dawn of man, can you imagine that part of my charge when I was asked to go in and unarmed, the only American, into a war to recover women on both sides of the war that were raped, tortured, and mutilated. And that included Armenian women. This is the country of Georgia and Abkhazia, and had offices in Sukhumi and the Black Sea. And I had to write a manual on how to recover women have gone through something that Adam would say has existed since the dawn of man. And I wonder under that presidential administration, whether it's just collecting dust or being passed on. Everything that Craig is talking to us about is stuff that we need to be able to pass on to the younger generations. And I'm totally inspired, as I hope you are, with this young generation. And we talked about the strengths of women, not only the women that trained me, that gave me those first things on domestic violence, which I can translate into Russian and go into Armenia and meet the chief of police who would just deny anything like this in Yerevan has ever happened. That's how far we have come and have to continue to come. And as Craig says, that he talks in 5 years where we'll be, 10 years where we'll be, and it's almost generations. But I am so pleased that we talk about the youth, whether Rosmig is worth with them to see them, whether we see that purity in the child, when we say that the child doesn't have these rationales and these prejudices. And I have seen so much, and just to encapsulate what going forward I can bring, because we talked about masculine and feminine roles. I have instruments that are made in Armenian and in English to give to men and women, like the Sarah Bem inventory on masculinity and femininity, to see where we truly are. Because I believe a lot of us men have at least had shining moments. I'm looking at two of them right now that are shining lights. And a lot of us, as Craig brought out, we don't speak up. We see it, and we don't observe it, and we haven't called anyone out. But the BEM exam tells you and explores the whole idea of masculinity and femininity. Finally, also, because Craig brought it up, was the nature and nurture, the ethno-psychodynamics. And I've lectured worldwide at the behest of the First Lady of Armenia on the psychodynamics of the Armenian women, going back from the very beginning and what she brings to the table. There is a nature to us, an psychodynamic nature. It's a Freudian school. It's relatively new. I did a lecture in Watertown on specifically at the same church Judy talked about. There was about 400 people as the Armenians in the world of business. Our dynamic is that we've had a history of problems. And as ones that have a history of problems, you have to have a history of problem solving. And it may be said about us in just that we love problems so much that we create them just to solve them. And what we do, and I noticed this amongst my ranks of veteran people, is we like to just get the task done. Adam's father and I have had wonderful discussions about the work in the workplace and getting things done. And I think at the very core, we can get things done in the direction of working on this issue. And why I say that is as a study of Armenian history, and I'm glad that our filmmaker Badet is here too, that Armenian women, and if you look at the books that are available through Iowa, you can see some incredible books. I've been reading more recent books on Russian women's literature that could never been seen, but the literature that Armenian women are to be proud of existed in a world that didn't even come up to that level. So why was it during the late 1800s up to like 1937, even under the yoke of Turkey, that all this wonderful work was done? Did we men play a role in this? And the answer may be as simple as we just stayed out of your way. And
Okay.
thank you for that smile. So again, just to keep it brief, there is so many things and so many anecdotal stories that I could see of the most positive and wonderful things that we can do, but there's a lot of work to be done ahead.
Mhm.
And the only things that I could ever say is that just these beautiful situations where when I went on the tarmac of Zvadnots waiting for a plane of refugee women that were wounded, that I had to care for, that needed plastic surgery, and he's waiting to use the presidential jet. We're the only people there under a grape arbor, and he's giving me his blessings. And he said how Christian it was that I was recovering even Muslim women. His plane took off, but before it took off, he sat under a chair, under a grape arbor, on a chair. And it was one of those bent back chairs you would see in any kind of cafe. My little plane arrived from Sochi, Russia. And coming off that chair was a 36-year-old grandmother whose leg was blown off. She had the same chair. But the strength of that woman was so incredible. When I put the victims of both sides of the war in the same post-op room, she almost she brought them together. She was an incredibly strong woman. And there's so many about it. There's so many of these stories in therapy that I could say these are the movies, and why I've never allowed my story to be told as much is because they just look at the veteran doing this work. The story is about who we are attending to.
Mhm.
And I remember getting very upset with the BBC at a press conference on that.
Manu, can
But
I ask you
I'll
to wrap
close
up
with-
now because we
yeah.
only have 20 minutes left.
I didn't see your hand sign, but I just wanted to close that in my exit interviews with Save the Children, USAID, and any number of organizations, and they were all women. They said to me, "Do you think because what you've done that peace will come?" And I said, if only the women can speak on behalf of themselves, will it come?
Mhm.
It's because these men speaking on the war dead and the victims that these kinds of things continue.
Mhm.
So that's where we're at. That's it.
Well, thank you so much, Manuk. And I think you have done so much over many years to help give women a bigger voice in both their lives and the lives of their communities, and not just in the Armenian community. So I want to personally thank you for that. And I'm also going to put into the report afterwards the notes I got from Maro Matosian about the National Action Plan. It's a 3-year plan that was submitted to the Ministry of Labor and Social Affairs in Armenia, some of the amendments to the domestic violence law, and other updates from her, so that we can go straight to comments and questions from the participants here. But we will include that so some of us who are interested in what's happening in Armenia with respect to these issues will get a little more information later. I'm going to actually ask Judith, who has written an amazing play, some of you here have seen, called Women of Ararat, who made a comment in the chat about how difficult it is to maybe work with boys who are living in families where the father is violent, both to the mother and maybe to the children. And Judith, if you're willing to unmute and maybe say something, we'd love to hear your thoughts, since I know you've given such a great deal of attention to this issue.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Edie, it's great to see you. You know, I have given it thought, but I don't have answers. I think that the father has to be the one who goes with the boy and gets the counseling or works within these programs, but they have to do it together. I don't know how else that would be done, but for a little boy to be sitting and learning these tools and learning how to respect And then going home to a father who is an offender, I just don't know how that would ever work.
Does anyone else have thoughts about how to handle a situation where a young boy, even young girls, witness this kind of violence of a father to a mother? Craig.
Well, I'm happy to respond. I know there's lots of expertise in this room for the intervention question, but providing support is necessary. Providing these alternatives is powerful. If the boy sees these alternatives, that's a good thing. Wishing for the father to go with the boy to counseling is a wonderful hope. That father needs to have a fair amount of self-reflection to get there. And generally speaking, that's not what you see at that stage. You see something different than that. And generally the intervention occurs when the survivors get some resource to move to. Then that creates some leverage for the abusive person to take some actions that would be different. Like the separate example of straight up domestic violence is a survivor who leaves and makes themselves no longer accessible to the offender, that makes them take another step. Sometimes it's the court that forces a certain step. Those that sort of interventions that cause some leverage that something happens. And people ask, well, what good does it do when someone's forced into counseling? It's always a good question. And we find that after some weeks of someone warming a chair, they begin to participate. These programs are a year long plus. A short program is a year long. And so these 12-week educational groups that exist have to be repeated for an understanding to occur. Most programs are group programs, not one-on-one counseling. So it's not so much about the relationship between the boy and the father, it's about the father's relationship to other fathers and other men. That he's dancing to a beat of a drum. And what is that story? And so unpacking that story is not a short-term project.
And I think one of the beautiful things you brought up, Judith, is that the fact that you opened up when I talked about the nature, the nurture, this is a picture. It's not only the father nurturing this son in the manner or demonstrating this. It's also the societies we live in. We are a diaspora, and the California Armenians and the New England Armenians and the Russian influence on the high Estancia Armenians, they're all different. These are the host impact, and even on our clergy, wherever the clergy comes from. The impact of the host environment is something that we have to deal with as well.
And another footnote, Manu, to this is that we have seen in other communities that, as Craig said, it's very hard to reach men who are already committing violence day in and day out in their own families. I know a woman who for many years wrote about women's health issues and then spent about 20 years in men's prisons talking to them in groups. As Craig said, a lot of these programs are in groups, and these were men who were convicted and imprisoned because of domestic violence and sexual assault. Some of them did come to an understanding of why that is not a solution ultimately. They had the time for reflection. They had the time to talk with one another, the time to see how their lives were turned upside down because of their knee-jerk response to conflict or an obstacle, which was to be violent in response. And she's starting to write about this, and the men are starting to write about what they've learned as well. But this is a long process, and it doesn't come easily. Even coming to the place of remorse is sometimes a long trajectory. But I think we should never give up hope. It's an example of why it's important to do the prevention work that Craig and others have been doing. Let's try to reach our communities, the mothers, the fathers, before a male perpetrator is put in prison. And we have a really sad situation where a family may be broken up. There could be enormous resentment. The understanding is hard to come by. And I think it's another reason why I'm excited about the prevention work. What kinds of role playing can we do? How can we reach parents and the early childhood educators to intervene at an early stage when it comes to bullying behaviors? I know that Facing History in Ourselves, which is a national program, has some extraordinary curricula that help teachers and parents address this. And I remember a teacher in a kindergarten in Brookline years ago saying that she had taken their course, and one of the 5-year-olds in the cloakroom called another little kid slant eyes in front of other little children. And one of the kids who had just been in the discussion about how name calling is the beginning sometimes of worse behavior, where you will hit someone, you'll treat them as less than other. And as Armenians, I think we know a lot about what happened with the genocide and how Turks could totally view Armenians as not human. What this little 5-year-old said to the kid who perpetrated this insult and called this other kid slant eyes was, hey, you're doing to him what we just said we shouldn't do to each other. You're calling him a name, and that's not good. And they brought that discussion back into the classroom. And there was some really important learning that teacher said happened, because one student made this nasty comment and another student said, hey, that's what we're not supposed to be doing. And they brought it back in, and nobody was punished for it, but the kids all had an understanding of how these kinds of hurtful acts begin without thinking, and we need to be more conscious and maybe button up our mouths before they come out. Anyway, who else would like to add something to this conversation? Just
Judith.
step in. I don't see any hands going up, but if you know how to use that reactions at the bottom and click on the hand, we can call upon you.
I just love the fact, and I'm going to get out, but the youth are very important. They are a beautiful light. You know, Craig talks about how young we work with the young people. And I have seen it and witnessed it in all kinds of, I do disaster mental health. I see the kids bring the color out of the darkness. They can bring the color out of this darkness as well.
Mm-hmm.
I think we have a few people in the, or some members from the Armenian Bar Association, and I know that there was a comment there by Lucy Barbechian who said that they are working. They have an office that is open to put restraining orders and work with families who have gone through such problems or are going through such problems. I really wish we didn't have that kind of a service anymore. We didn't need to have that service, but it's good to know that they are provided. Lucy, did you want to say anything about that? Or I think there's another member of the Bar Association here as well, but I don't see their name. So
I'm happy to comment. I'm in the car, so I'm sorry about that. But,
oh, okay.
The quick comment is that about a year and a half ago, the Bar Association formed a domestic violence awareness committee. One of the primary focus of the committee was to put together a white paper and then work with the Ministry of Labor and Social Services to offer some alternatives, working with family law practitioners from the US. And I'm happy to say that we're very close to completing that effort in the summer. When we travel to Armenia, we will try to put that effort into place. We've been working not just with Maru Matosyan, but the lawyers in the center to make sure that we understand the actual effects, the impacts, and the utilization of the law itself. But as we were working on this effort, we identified that same need, unfortunately, in one of the larger Armenian communities, diasporan communities here in Glendale. We have connected with Serpazan Dederian and Father Vasken, and also the Glendale Police Department. One of the higher ranking police captains is of Armenian descent. He's committed to assisting this effort. Our plan is to continue to do our outreach and work with others in the community who provide services in this area. But we didn't want to wait as far as the services that we could provide, and specifically in the context of allowing victims of domestic violence to get the legal services that they need. So there's more information on the bar's website. We would welcome, any questions you would have, and if you'd like to make referrals, we're happy to do our part.
Thank you so much, Lucy. That's quite informative. And I think bringing together the members of the police force, the members of the clergy, social workers, members in the community who all care about this issue is vital. And that is what Mara Matosian has been doing with the Women's Support Center and their work with the police, with the ministry, with any element of society where there's interest expressed. And we have seen the needle move. I think that even though there are infractions among members of the police, there are also some good examples of progress. So, we shouldn't be totally discouraged by how slow things have been going. They're still moving in the right direction in some ways. Other comments? Yes, Karine.
Hello. It's nice to see all of you. This was great. Thank you, Ewa. I know in Armenia, sometimes some men get angry, like you're from diaspora, get out. Who are you to come tell us what to do? Of course, we know who they are, the rabbis, but how do we deal, not coming, rescuing people, just educating people who work in Armenia? What do you suggest?
Boy, it's a good question. I don't think it's a problem in any one community. It's really it's an attitudinal problem that we see everywhere. The time that Craig and I have spent in Armenia, we've met men who run the spectrum on this, and women too. One of the things that's really important for any movement trying to prevent domestic violence and sexual assault is that people from the community are playing leadership roles and making it clear that this is not an infiltrate, somebody disrupting our culture. We have a long way to go. In one of those better publicized cases where a man who killed his wife, they had 2 children, was brought to justice and came out of the courtroom saying, what kind of a system would take a father from his children? And everyone's looking around saying, well, you just took the mother from these 2 children. And it's, to understand the equivalence here is not easy for some people. And that's where the education comes in.
That's a beautiful thought. And, when I moved to Armenia,
Monica Prelian,
in early 2004, and I started observing what was going on. And somebody also mentioned about fatherhood. And I could see what was going on and how do you effectively change things. I met one a father, he had a son, he wanted a daughter, but he used to tell me, and he was just like my father, always taking care of the children. I never seen his wife feed or change the child. But I was teaching at the Women's Resource Center. I had all MSW graduates. And I said to them, I noticed that on the streets of Yerevan, that men are carrying children by themselves and not women. And they said, I don't believe it. And I said, you might be right. Come back, see what you see, and come back to the next class. You're right, but we don't think these men are the fathers of those children. They're holding those children so they can meet other women. And the one that I labeled him the baby whisperer. There was, the incredible thing is that what women are looking for, and I have a colleague, Dr. Pelin, she's from Turkey, and she's talked about women writing the soap operas in Turkey. And if you know what's going on there, that it's changing the entire society because it's only women as producers and writers, and women are believing in that's the image of the man I want. They either divorce their husbands or they call the police on them. But the change could be as simple as a little child mimicking the men walking down the street which had their hands clutched behind their backs. And I saw this at the opera. And within 24 hours, because that little toddler was doing the same thing, not one man was doing that.
Mhm. Well, I just noticed the time. We have 4 minutes left. So I want to give both Razmig and Arum a chance to make some concluding remarks. And you too, Craig, if you'd like to. I don't see any other hands up right now, but if you have a question, you can add it in the chat and we'll try to get an answer when we do our summary report and put it in there for follow-up. And don't forget to share the link to this discussion with any men and women you know to see if we could generate more interest in participation on the part of men. And next time we'd like to actually think more concretely about a project that we could sort of begin, a group of men maybe starting a project virtually or in a community and make a little progress in that sense. So Razmik, you got any
I'm so sorry to interrupt, Judy. There's also one hand up, and I would like to give Armin Hovhannisyan a chance to also say a word.
Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't see that. Yes, go ahead, Armin.
I did just now. Thank you, everybody. It's nice seeing and hearing from a lot of old friends and new friends. I work with Lucy Varpetian, who's the chair of the bar, and also in the Bar Association, our Professor Gavor and Razmik Sarkisyan. Thank you to Iowa for sponsoring this. We've been at this for a couple years, and many people have been at this for many years and decades. Mr. Kaprelian and Ms. Norsigian and others. We are, and I have to say it this way, we need a cultural shift, and the cultural shift is going to take years. It wasn't long ago when we used to walk the streets of Yerevan that nobody obeyed the traffic laws. Everybody would go through the red lights, and then there was enforcement. Nobody used to put seatbelts on, and now they use seatbelts. Now they put a law in force, and it'll take some time to actually be implemented. You can't smoke indoors. It's going to take Armenia's buy-in. It's going to take the leadership of Armenia to say that this matters for us. And so this is all part of a great conversation. Right now, it's a balkanized conversation because they are not quite there yet. It takes all of this to sensitize the Republic of Armenia and its citizens that to be the right type of man, to be an Armenian man, to be a real man. Real men do not beat their wives and their children. They do not inflict any corporal or psychological punishment or oppression on their families. They just don't do that. Now, it's not, and this is much harder than stopping at a red light. It really is, because it's been ingrained in our culture, unfortunately, and not only Hayastansi, all around, Western Armenia included, but it's highlighted there. But this is one piece of the puzzle. But in order for the puzzle's pieces to be completed more fulsomely, we have to invest in the cultural and legislative shift in Armenia. Because without the National Assembly and telling the people of Armenia that that you have to stop at a red light, you have to stop your fist, you have to stop your words several inches, several feet away from your daughters and from your wives, that's not going to happen. And so what the Bar Association, Iowa, and others are doing, that's all part of the solution. So thank you. It's a big ask here, what everybody's doing. Maybe next time where the Bar or Iowa get involved and Matosian, we go ahead and we partner in these types of Zooms with those in Armenia. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Armin.
Armin, quick question. Is there a family court system in Armenia yet?
No, there is not. Not only is there not a family court system, there was not a domestic violence statute. And then there was one. It was mealy-mouthed. It was toothless. The benefit of the doubt went to the batterer. The victim had to expose herself. She had to actually make herself more vulnerable. I mean, it's horrible. And so now, as Lucy said, there's some tentative engagement with the ministries there to evolve into enlightenment. We're going to see it in our lifetime. We are going to see it in our lifetime, but it's not going to be today or tomorrow. But without doing what everybody's doing here, it's not going to happen even in 2 or 3 years. So again, thanks.
I'm from Rhode Island. The disconnect is amazing. Half of us, and we of the seated judges on the family court, including 2 Chief Justice, 1 male, and the first female Chief Justice to the Rhode Island Family Court.
Right.
It's quite a disconnect.
That's great. Well, I'm really glad, Armin, you could make that comment. And I know we're past 3:30 now, but I do want to give at least 1 minute to Arum and Razmig to give their concluding thoughts. And then we will reconvene next month. And we're going to continue this and maybe get more concrete about what we can do and how we can collaborate with Mauro and our colleagues in Armenia, despite the time difference, which is a challenge. So Arum, a few thoughts.
Sure. So again, in closing, thanks so much for organizing this and for inviting me to contribute. By my approximation, it seems that there are perhaps 3 tracks by which conduct is taking place for remediation. First is at the macroscopic international level, second is at the national level and local level, and then third is at the individual level. And it's wonderful to see the level of sophistication at all 3 of them. But the most immediate thing that we can do, of course, is when we leave the Zoom, is when we're around our own families, do our very best to promote these values, and certainly with our friends as well. And that's something that I think I take from this with a renewed resolve.
I guess since we started discussing diaspora and homeland relations, I'll share some things that I've shared with my AYF. This something where one group is going to be a savior to another. We really have we're in this together. The issues that we face aren't exclusive to Armenia or any other countries. It's in our communities, in our backyards here, and we have a lot to learn from one another. And this isn't something that's foreign or transplanted into our cultural understanding. This is a part of our tradition. And I would point us to figures like Sosa Maidig and Sarap Akhbir, who fought alongside one another, who participated in the national movement. And one of the examples that I love is bringing up the example of the First Republic of Armenia. In 1918, when women were still struggling for the right to vote in the United States, we had a progressive government that gave the right to vote to women, that had almost 10% women represented in parliament, that elected the world's first female ambassador, Diana Abgar, to Japan. And I think it's about us reclaiming that and harmonizing these initiatives with our culture. They're not in opposition or in contrast, but it's a part of who we've always been. And it's about not allowing current cultural norms that are foreign to us, such as these notions of patriarchy or toxic masculinity, from affecting who we are. So on that note, thank you so much for this opportunity.
Oh, thank you, Razmig. And back to you, Silver, for wrap up.
Well, thank you very much. Honestly, I mean, this has been one of the best sessions that we've had, because we've had men participating in it more than ever. And I just want to reiterate that violence against women is not inevitable. If on the spectrum of readiness that Craig presented, we are all willing and ready and become active leaders with the right policies and programs, as we've heard, we can bring results. And it means long-term comprehensive strategies, probably, that tackle the root causes of violence, protect the rights of women and girls, and we can promote strong and autonomous women's rights. The campaign to end violence against women calls on a cross-section of society, calls on us, calls on you and me to actively seek to change the culture of violence into one of respect and equality for gender, and it is everybody's human right. Now, I want to personally thank our guests, Aram, Razmik, Manu, Judy, and Craig for your participation in today's session. And thank you to the YWCA Glendale Pasadena for joining in the effort with AWA, Ariana Chavez, who is the manager of domestic violence and outreach education at the Glendale Pasadena YWCA, is also here as one of the attendees and has helped us with the attendance today. So thank you again. We do look forward to presenting part 2 on February the 26th. And we encourage you to ask your male friends, your partners, your brothers, colleagues to join in on the next conversation if we want to move forward with the idea and the ideology of prevention. And last but not least, thank you to all our attendees really across the globe, because we do have quite a few people across the globe, as I see in the chats too, that we really appreciate your presence, especially on a Saturday at the different time zones. Now, please look out for future events. And if you are not yet a member of AWA, we do encourage you to go to our website, awainternational.org, and join the global network of women who share our values. Our goal is to engage communities, enable connections, enhance well-being, elevate leaders, and empower learning. So stay well, stay safe, stay informed, stay relevant. Until next time. And thank you all again.